Hi. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm having some instability issues with my internet connection or my Zoom connection. Not sure which one it is. So I'm hoping nothing's going to happen in the middle. Welcome everybody. Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. We're back here together again. No matter where we are together. It's a different understanding of together. Zoom has made the word together, I think, it'd be a little bit more broad than we normally would have assumed. I want to acknowledge the sponsorship of tonight's Shiur. Thank you very much to Helen Brown, who was sponsoring tonight's Shiur. In memory of her father, Sam Siegel, Zichrono Livracha. I knew her father, and I wish his neshama aliyah and Helen and her whole family should be blessed with long life and good health. And may our Limud Torah tonight be a source of merit for his memory and for a source of merit for all of those who need a Yeshua, need a refuah, the hostages, for their speedy release and for their complete recovery from this terrible, terrible trauma, for all of the Jewish people who are dealing with so many different things this week and beyond. So hopefully our learning will be a little bit of a scoop to tip the scales in Shemayim. Tonight, I decided that I wanted to focus not so much on Parashat Tisa, which is Parashat Shavua, but I thought we would do a Purim class. But there is a connection. I want to do two connections to the Parsha and to Purim. And beyond that, I want to share some ideas about Purim, about the Megillah, and a little bit more broadly about Purim in general. But I do also want to make the following announcement. Tuesday, April the 1st, is going to be a class not about Parsha. It's going to be about Haggadah, ideas, and messages. I've done that now for a few years, where before Pesach, I spend the hour, our time together, going through various parts of the Haggadah. So people want to collect ideas and messages for Pesach. That would be an amazing time to do it. So that's going to be April the 1st. That'll also be the last class before the Pesach break. So there won't be a class on April the 8th. April the 1st will be the last one. The other point that I want to tell everybody is that obviously this class is on Zoom and I'm using the shul's Zoom link, which today is not a problem, but it will be a problem on April the 1st. And the reason it's going to be a problem on April the 1st is that the link that I'm using tonight is the same link that the shul uses for Mincha Maariv. And we still maintain Zoom connection for those people who, for whatever reason, are unable to join us, some local, some not local, and they Zoom in. But it's the same link, and it'll be approximately at the same time. So in order for us to maintain both davening as well as the Shiur, one of the two usages will have to use a different link. I'm not exactly sure what, but I hopefully will have a more definitive answer for everybody, Mirat Hashem, in the coming week. I hope so. So there will probably be a different link that I think that's what happened last year. They gave me a different link. So I don't know, but I'll try to find out. So those are the few announcements. Again, April 1st is not going to be about Parsha. It's going to be Haggadah, ideas and messages. And April 1st will also be the last before the Pesach break. And it very likely will be on a different Zoom link, and I'll try to get that information. Hopefully, if it's not, you can maybe check the shul's website, and maybe the link will be posted there. I can ask them to do that. Okay, so let's begin. Let's begin with Parshat Tisa, because I want to make a connection right in the very beginning with Parshat Tisa and Purim, which it may not be something that you would normally have thought of, but I want to show you how our Chachamim, in fact, did see a connection. So again, you don't have to follow along in the Chumash, but if you are, it's Perek Lamed, chapter 30, and excuse me, 1 minute. And it's Pasuk Kaf Bet and Kaf Gimel, 22 and 23. So again, most of Parashat Tisa is about the Egel HaZahav story, but the very beginning part, the one we're focusing on right now, is not about that. It's still about the Mishkan. So we have Truma Tetzava, the last two parashat, which focus on the Mishkan. We have a short beginning section of Tisa, which also talks about the Mishkan. And then we have the other two remaining parashat in Sefer Shemot, Vayakel Pekudei, which also discuss the Mishkan, not providing new instruction, but detailing the construction and the building until the completion of the Mishkan. But here in Perek Lamed in Parshat Tisa, the Torah talks about some aspects of the inauguration, the consecration of the Mishkan, and the anointment of oil that's part of the ritual process of inaugurating the Mishkan. So I want to read to you. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, the more Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Ve'ata kach lecha bisamin rosh mar diror chamesh miyot v'tin man besem machatzito chamishim u'matayim uknei vosem chamishim u'matayim. Now, you take for yourself choice spices, 500 shekel weights of pure myrrh, mar diror, fragrant cinnamon, kinamon, yep, that's where it comes from, half of which shall be 250 of fragrant cane, 500 of cassia in the sacred shekel weight, and a hin of olive oil. Of it you shall make oil of sacred anointment, a blended compound, the handiwork of a perfumer, and it shall remain oil of sacred anointment. And with it you shall anoint the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, and the ark of testimony with habits, the Aron Haidut, the table, the shulchan, and all its vessels, the menorah and its utensils, and the Mizbeach Ketoret. So again, the Torah is telling us that part of the proper inauguration of the Mishkan is not just the construction, but there had to be a ritual of inauguration, which involved this compound of oil and other spices. Okay, I said pouring. What's the connection? So I want to go back to the beginning and some of the specific spices that were outlined. So the very first one that we talked about was something called pure myrrh. In Hebrew, it's mar diror. Mar, which sounds very similar to the word that we use in English. Maybe that is the reason, because we don't know how to say it otherwise. Myrrh, mar, and diror, which stone translation always, again, generally speaking, bases its translation on the interpretation of Rashi. It translates it as pure myrrh. Okay. But I want to read to you, not Rashi or the Pasuk, I want to read to you the Aramaic translation that's found in the Chumash by the great translator Onkelos. So Onkelos translates, but as you now know, translations are really more than just that. They're also interpretations. The translator had to make a choice of what words he wanted to use in order for the reader to understand. So here's the translation into Aramaic of what we just read. And again, it's you shall take ve'at sav lach, you shall take for yourself, busmin, spices, and then rosh, the next word is rosh, which is choice. That's the word in Hebrew. And the next two words are the spice, mar diror, which I translated as pure myrrh. But listen to the words in the Aramaic. Mira dachya, mira dachya, mira dachya, pure oil, pure myrrh, mira dachya. So I want to tell you, before going on, about a very unusual Gemara in Masechet Chulin, Daf Kufla Metet Amud Beis. And the Gemara in Masechet Chulin asks a series of 4 what seems to be unusual questions. It starts this way: Moshe min haTorah minayin. Moshe min haTorah minayin, which literally means, what is the scriptural origin or scriptural source, the verse in the Torah that shows us about Moshe? That's an odd question, because almost the entire Torah has scriptural verses about Moshe's life and his accomplishments and his achievements. Anything in the book of Shemot, Vayikra b'Midbar, and certainly the Barim. So it's an unusual question. That's the first of 4 questions. The next question is Haman min haTorah minayin. What's the scriptural verse in the Torah, not in Tanakh, in the Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah? What's the scriptural verse that shows us about Haman? Haman min haTorah minayin. The third question, Esther min haTorah minayin. What's the scriptural verse for Esther? And then the fourth one, Mordechai min haTorah minayin. So just be very clear. Of the four that I just mentioned, Moshe, Haman, Esther, and Mordecai, I hope everybody knows that the only name that actually appears in Chamisha Chumshei Torah is Moshe. Esther, Haman, Hester, and Mordecai lived well after the completion of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. So right away, we understand that this question that the Gemara is asking is not a simple question. That the Gemara is expecting us to peel back a layer and to think much more deeply. This isn't a frivolous question. The Gemara is not a frivolous book, and the Chachamim are certainly not frivolous minds. So if the Gemara is asking a question, what's the scriptural source of Moshe? It doesn't mean what you and I think it means initially. Oh, which psukim can we find Moshe's name? That's not it. Now, when it says, where's the scriptural source for Haman in the Torah? Well, you and I both know that Haman's not part of the biblical narrative. And yet the Gemara asks that question. So there's got to be something deeper. What's the scriptural origin? What's the scriptural source for the name Esther? Well, there is no Esther in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. It comes later in Megillat Esther, written centuries later. And finally, what's the scriptural source of the name Mordecai? But the Gemara gives an answer to each one. And right now, I'm only going to talk about the last one because that has to do with this first reading that I shared with you. So the Torah tells us that of the various spices that were made into this compound that was used to anoint the Mishkan, one of them in Hebrew, according to the Torah, is called Mar Dror. But the Aramaic translation of Mar Dror is Miradachia. So I don't know whether you can hear the sound as I say it, but the letters, the two words Miradachia, Mem Resh Yud Aleph, Dalet Chaf Yud Aleph, actually have the letters of the name Mordechai. Mira Dachia, Mordechai. And so the Gemara's answer can't be frivolous. Oh, look, the sounds have a similarity. It's cute. Oh, that must be Mordechai. The Gemara is not frivolous, and it's not cute, and it's not lighthearted. And so the Gemara is telling us that it believes that this Aramaic translation of the words, the spices used in the anointing of the Mishkan, Mar Dror, is somehow connected to Mordecai. Then the Gemara is asking us to, again, pull the curtain back, think a little bit more deeply. What's that connection? Because really, there is no explicit mention of Mordecai in the Chumash. Explicit. But there may be some sort of allusions to something that are worthy of our consideration. So let's think about what that is. And I want to share with you an explanation of Rabbi Shimon Schwab and expand a little bit. Rabbi Shimon Schwab was a Rav in Breuer's, New York. He ended up being a Rav in Germany, was a student of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, emigrated to the United States, settled in the Washington Heights area of Manhattan. Some of you may be familiar with that, and led the community, the Adas Yeshurun congregation there, and he took over after Rabbi Breuer. That's why it was called Breuer Community. Anyways, he wrote a book, in many books, an excellent book, by the way, on prayer, in case anybody wants a book that sort of helps explain the depth of thinking, the profundity of Jewish prayer. His book on Jewish prayer and Tefillah is really excellent. But he also wrote his thoughts on the Parsha, called Ma'ayan Beta Shoeva. When it comes to this week's Parsha, Tisa, and at this specific point that the Gemara alludes to, that the name Mar Dror in the Torah is translated by Onkelos as Maria Dachia, what is the point of that? So in Hebrew, the word dror, I don't know if some of you are familiar with that, usually means freedom or liberty. By the way, those of you who may have been to Philadelphia, come from Philadelphia, they have the Liberty Bell and proclaim liberty throughout the land. Well, that's actually a biblical verse, and in that biblical verse of declare liberty throughout the land, the word liberty in the word of the Torah is dror. So that appears here as well. So what could the possibility be that the Torah is trying to mention here And how could that explanation be possibly connected to Purim? So Mar Deror, free myrrh, would sometimes be translated not like I translated here in stone, but wild myrrh. So why would it be better translated wild? Why should the word dror be translated as pure as opposed to wild? Well, what's free? Something which is unrestrained, something which is wild. So you have wild flowers that grow in fields, and you could have wild myrrh that isn't cultivated in a garden or a pot or anything. It just grows wildly. And so it's possible that the Torah is saying that amongst the compounds, you should be looking for wild myrrh, an herb that naturally grows freely and spreads easily. But Targum Onkelos has a different explanation. Mara Dachya. Dachya doesn't mean wild, it means pure. So according to the Targum, dror doesn't mean freedom, but it means purity. So wherein is this taking us? So Rav Schwab suggests in his book that on the surface, Mordechai might be seen as simply liberating the Jewish people from Haman's edict. The Jews were put under the microscope. The Jews, as it were corralled for a future destiny of annihilation. And so their liberties were going to be taken from them. The enemy was going to make their lives extinct, cut them off, as it were. But Mordecai, as the great, along with, of course, Esther, was seen possibly as a liberator. So that's possible to think that maybe that's why Mar Dror could possibly be that source of explanation of why Mordecai could maybe be understood as being the man that brought freedom to the Jewish people. He may have simply liberated the Jews from Haman's evil edict. But the Gemara tells us that that's not the case. The Gemara is the one that says, while that may be linguistically the more correct interpretation of Mar Dror, Dror being seen elsewhere in Tanakh as being clearly the word for liberty, the Gemara says, look, Onkelos chose not to say that. Onkelos chose to say something about purity, meaning that now we have to understand Mordechai in a different light. It wasn't that he was a freedom fighter, but that he brought purity back to the Jewish people. So let's just stop for a second and say, what's the idea there? So when the Gemara, Masechet Kulin says, Mordechai mina Torah minayin, what's the point? What does that mean? Maybe what it means is this, and I'm pushing this a little bit, I know, that there are moments or periods in the history of the Jewish people when you look at us and you examine the state of affairs of the Jewish people, purity may not be the word that comes to mind. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes we let ourselves drop. Sometimes we let ourselves be stained. Sometimes we let ourselves be influenced by forces that clearly are not Jewish. Not only are they not Jewish, they're antithetical to the things the Torah is trying to teach us. We become so inured and so familiar with and so accepting of all sorts of cultural zeitgeists that come upon us like the winds of change. And we flow with it. We're okay with it. But being okay with it doesn't make it right. It perhaps may diminish us. It perhaps may lessen our potentials. It may, in fact, make us less pure. And that sometimes it takes a bold leader to be the catalyst that raises the people back to the level they belong. And Mordecai, maybe, is that person. But again, keeping within, I think, one of the guidelines that I use in studying the Chumash, if that's the case, what's the point here of the Onkelos trying to translate this section of the Chumash as Mordechai being pure, is it a message just for that period of time? Maybe it's not. Maybe we need to sort of re-sanctify ourselves at times. That just like the Mishkan needed to be sanctified and had its purpose made clear, sometimes we need that. We need that oil to be poured over us, metaphorically, you understand. And we need those people who have the strong voices. We need those people who have the messages, the leadership, those people who stand before us and guide us to once again raise us to where we need to go. And that's why when the Gemara says, Mordechai min Torah minayin, it's not asking about only the person Mordechai. I think it's asking more, and it has to, because we can't be just looking at this literally. Otherwise, this doesn't make sense. Moshe min Torah minayin is the key to understanding. You need to look at these questions not in a literal sense. The Torah knows about Moshe. We know about Moshe. So you're asking that question. You're obviously using a different expectation, using a different language. And so here we are, the beginning of Parsha Tisa, and almost in a fascinating way, the Gemara wants us to know we are talking about the Mishkan, but there's so much more about the Mishkan that we need to understand well beyond this is a historical creation that had to do for a period of time in the desert and is gone now. This is not about the past. It's about who we are and where we live. And I think if everybody takes a look at the sort of nature of modern society, sometimes it looks like it's really not pure. And sometimes the things be all mixed up. And sometimes we long for the days where we can regain our purity. And so let's start with that. But if I'm already starting with that, I want to move, I'm going to jump in the Parsha a little bit. I know I'm jumping. I want to go to Perek Lamed Beit. Perek Lamed Beit is the story of the Egel HaZahav. And I want to go to it because I want to connect what we just said about the translation of Mordechai's name in this section to another story. This is the key story. This is the Egel HaZahav story. So this is the story where Moshe Rabbeinu was called up at Har Sinai. He warns the people, don't touch the mountain. He gets it. Now he's going up to spend 40 days and 40 nights, and he's destined to come down from the mountain with the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, upon which God, in his own handwriting, writes the Aseret HaDibrot. Okay, so apparently, according to what the Torah tells us, the people made a mistake. What's the mistake? They miscalculated the amount of time that Moshe is going to be away, and they thought Moshe should have returned to them before he actually was scheduled to return. They made a mistake in the timing and the calculation. So Moshe doesn't return. The people become very scared, and I'm not going to go through the whole story. They turn to Aharon, they coerce Aharon to create some sort of image which they believe is going to somehow restore their confidence. Is it an act of idolatry? Big question. But they make this Egel HaZahav. Moshe is now still on the mountain, and Hashem turns to him in chapter 32, Pasuk Tet-Vav, and he says, you have to go down because the Jewish people have committed a terrible, terrible sin. Moshe takes the Shnei Luchot HaBrit with him, and he starts descending the mountain. As he's coming down, he greets Yehoshua. Yehoshua hears that all these noises emanating from the people, and he says it's the sound of battle in the camp. And Moshe knows that, of course, that's not what's going on. He says, no, it's not a sound of shouting, not a sound shouting strength, nor a sound shouting weakness. It's a sound of distress that I hear. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down, and I'm now reading chapter 32, Lamed Beit Pasuk Yud 19. Vayhi kasher karav el hamachaneh, vayar et ha'egel u'mecholot, vaychar af Moshe, vayashlech miyadav et haluchot, vayeshaber otam tachat hahar. It happened as he, Moshe, drew near to the camp, and he saw the calf, vayar et ha'egel u'mecholot, and dances. And Moshe's anger flared up, and he threw down the tablets. He broke the Shnei Luchot HaBrit. So Moshe's coming down. Yehoshua is hearing all this noise, and he doesn't know what to make of it. He's not sure what he hears. Moshe understands this isn't fighting. They're dancing, they're singing, they're celebrating. It's the joyous sound of people celebrating. He comes down and he sees the Egel and he sees the dances and he throws down the Shnei Luchot Abrit. Let me just ask you a question. And we've said this multiple times. There are very few descriptions in the Torah because the point is not to write a novel. The point is to teach some sort of eternal messages. So let's go back to this description of what Moshe saw and think about the following. Moshe saw two things, didn't he? According to the Torah, he saw the Egel and he saw the dances. So isn't the Egel really what is the sin here? Isn't the Egel the part that infuriated him? Isn't that what we all have built into our understanding of the story? Isn't that what Moshe was upset about, the Egel? So who cares about the dancing? Like, I don't care. Like, they're dancing, they're not dancing, they're smoking, they're not smoking. What? The Egel is what Hashem thinks is the disloyalty. It's the treason. It's the act of theological adultery. God just gave them the aseret that he brought out loud, and it's as though the Jewish people are standing under the chuppah, and they're turning around while they're standing under the chuppah, they're beginning a relationship with another God. So God gets furious. He wants to destroy the Jewish people. But the Torah's insistence, no, you have to understand, it's the Egel that Moshe saw, and he saw the dances. I want to share with you Sforno's understanding of what's going on here, because it's very instructive, because I think Sforno tries to understand why the mecholot matter so much, why the dances matter. So I want you to listen to Sforno's explanation, and I am connecting this, by the way, to Purim. You just have to be patient for a couple more minutes. So here's Sforno's explanation. Vayara Egel, so Moshe saw the calf, umecholot, and the dances. Vayichar af Moshe, and Moshe became angry. And what does Sforno say? Kishara'a shahayu smechim bikilkul sha'asu. Moshe was upset because why? They were celebrating. They were happy. It's not just that they made an Egel, which infuriated Moshe. No, the Egel would have been Halbatzor, as they say. But what made it into a huge issue was because they were celebrating the Aveira. That, according to Smechim B'Kilkul, they were happy that they had done this. Ubazeh hitkatzef v'noash, and this made him angry, and this made him despondent. Shiuchal litkona meuvat. Maybe he wouldn't be able to correct this. It's one thing when a person does a sin. I get it. I do a sin, and maybe I regret it, and I'm sorry I didn't do it. I'm not strong enough. I couldn't manage. I couldn't overcome. But to be happy at the Avera is not the same as doing the Avera and knowing you've done it. But celebrating the Avera may be a step gone just too far. And that's why Moshe was upset, because he wasn't sure that he'd be able to bring them back. He couldn't be certain that he could bring them back to where they needed to be. And that, says Sforno, is why the Torah insists on us knowing about the dances. The Egel, for sure, is a problem. But the joy, the simcha, the feeling of self-satisfaction, and what they did, that apparently is too much. So why am I mentioning this? What's the connection with Purim? So the Gemara wants to deal with what surely is an obvious question in the story of Purim, and it's right at the very beginning of Megillat Esther. So as you remember, the beginning of Megillat Esther, you and I are made witness to a story in which this king Achashverosh, not at the beginning of his reign, but well into his reign, conducts this extraordinary celebration, and he divides it into two celebrations. One celebration, which is 180 days long for all the outlying regions, and then a separate celebration for those people, this was much shorter, 7 days, who lived in Shushan. Apparently, the king's palace was in Shushan. But the big celebration was 180 days, and that was a celebration for people from all throughout the empire. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Problem is that everybody was invited, and Everybody was instructed by Achashverosh, and this is what's already mentioned in Megillat Esther. Everybody was instructed by the king to feel comfortable within the party. That sounds like a very nice thing. I wish all hosts did that. So who was invited to the party? Well, everybody, including Jewish people. So traditionally, and the Gemara talks about this, and not even just Gemara in a retrospective, I think it's happening in our time too. When terrible things happen to us, when tragedies happen to us, it's not uncommon. Maybe it's even a good thing for people to say, why did this happen? Nothing happens for a random reason. Nothing happens for a coincidence, not in God's world. God is not a random God. God is very deliberate. So when something at the scale of Purim happens, then the Chachamim certainly post the story, maybe even during the story, but clearly following it, stop and think, okay, why did this happen? What happened? And then the Gemara asks the same question. What happened? Why did they deserve annihilation? Even though I know at the end of the story, of course, they didn't. But the fact that the story unfolds with the potential annihilation of the Jewish population at that time, probably most of the world, what happened? Why were they what were they guilty of? And so the Gemara's answer is stunning. Shenehenu misudat Achashverosh. What did they do? They took part, they enjoyed in the feast of Achashverosh, this 180-day feast. And Jews came and they enjoyed the feast. So what's so bad about that? You can say, well, Jews coming and eating treif food? That's terrible. That's terrible. Well, a lot of the Meforshim and a lot of the commentaries on the story say, no, that's not exactly what happened. You see, Mordechai himself at that point, although we don't get introduced to Mordechai till later on in the Megillah, that doesn't mean that Mordechai didn't play a role earlier on as well. And according to so many Meforshim, Mordechai was the one to make sure that all the Jews who were at that party were eating kosher food. Oh, so they weren't having trade? No. So that's not so bad, is it? I mean, sometimes we get invited to events that are not kosher, but we specifically request a kosher meal, and it comes packaged in the plastic and stuff, and we sit and we have a meal. And we participate in whatever the event is. It could be a political event. It could be an honorary tribute to somebody who's done great things. Okay. And now we have a kosher meal, so we're not eating treif. So what would be wrong with that happening? So that's a powerful question that the Gemara tries to answer. And in order to answer that, the Gemara says, well, what is it that happened at the party? There wasn't treif food. Could there have been something else that happened that would have precipitated this response on God's part that if you're going to be doing this, then I'm sorry, this is bad. So I don't know whether or not those of you are musically inclined, but if you are musically inclined, in the reading of the first chapter, there's a couple of phrases that the Baal Koreh reads in which he actually changes the trup, the melody that is common to Megillat Esther, and he changes it slightly for certain words and uses the trup, the melody that's connected with Megillat Eicha. And Eicha, of course, is the Megillah that we read on Tisha B'Av, the national day of observance of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And what is it that we read? We read that at this party of 180 days, that everybody could have what they wanted. Everybody was given the opportunity to feel that they've been catered to personally. And so you can just imagine the opulence as the Megillah tells us, all the colors and all the richness and all the wealth and all the indulgence and all the kalim, the vessels that were used to serve things on. And it says mikalim shonim, all sorts of vessels. And it's there that the Baal Koreh uses the trup from Eicha. Well, wait a second. Why? Why would we take away the trup from Esther and then replace it with Eicha for the idea of varied vessels? Because our tradition says the vessels that Achashverosh was serving at that party, where do they come from? Some of them came from the Beit HaMikdash that was destroyed, the first Beit HaMikdash, that had made their way back to Persia. And Melech Achashverosh was serving vessels, gold vessels, that would have been used by the Kohanim and Levi'im in the Beit HaMikdash. And they were being served at this party. And who was at the party? A lot of people, but including the Jewish people. How could you be sitting at a party and, according to the language of the Gemara, enjoying yourself while watching the distribution or the use of kelim that would have been taken from our Beit HaMikdash at the time of destruction, at the time that part of our people would have been killed under the attack, would have been forcibly exiled. And Jews in exile are at the dinner of the monarch, and he's serving kosher food, but he's serving it or he's presenting other things that were taken from the Beit HaMikdash. And they were okay with that? Jews were okay with that? Well, if you're okay with that, if the Jewish people of Persia from all over, remember, these are not just the Jews from Shushan, these are Jews coming from all parts of the empire, 127 people, 127 states or provinces. All of the key people were invited, and many of the key people were Jewish people, because as we know, Jewish people ultimately occupy very frequently positions of leadership. So they all come to Shushan. They're all having this party, and they're all sitting there and having to drink, and the music and the gaiety, everybody's fine. And they're serving things on the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, and they're okay with it. Well, if they're okay with it, that's not good. And I want to connect what I just said now is to explain the Gemara's answers to what happened. Why did the whole story of Haman have to unfold? It had to unfold because the Jews felt so comfortable in a country that was belittling their heritage that that's already a serious, I don't know what the word is, more than an infraction. It's a fall to such a low level. Let's go back to the beginning of Tisa. More drawer. It's not just about liberty. Gemara says, let's go use Onkelus's translations. Maradochia. It's about purity. It's about restoring purity in a condition which it seems to have been has gone. That the Jews were so okay. They were so assimilated. They were so accepting of what was going on that they had dropped to that level. That the kelim and the Beit HaMikdash didn't make them get up and leave, burst out in tears, protest, send a message, send a letter. None of that. And so at the very beginning, the Megillah says, why did they do this? Because of that. Meaning, and just to be very clear, even though the party was taking place at Shushan, and you could say, so why didn't just the people in Shushan get punished? It wasn't just the people in Shushan. This was the party for everybody throughout the country. And so the Jewish population of all of Paras would have been represented amongst the Jewish people who were invited to this. So that takes us back to, I think, understanding the background to the story, at least according to some traditional rabbinic sources as to what's going on. Okay, let's go on to something which is not quite as textual as that, but will be of, I think, some interest beginning on Thursday morning. So Thursday morning, as everybody knows, you take a look at your calendar, is called Ta'anit Esther. Literally means the fast of Esther. Interestingly enough, there is no unanimity amongst our sources as to why we are fasting on the 13th day of Adar. So let me share with you three perspectives on why we're fasting and why Ta'anit Esther has come to be a fast. And by the way, it's not one of the, let's say, most strict fasts. So if somebody would have been, or somebody will, God forbid, not be feeling well on Thursday, chas v'sholom, this would be one of the fasts where if you got a headache and not feeling well, it will be okay to break the fast. But be that as it may, it's a shame everybody be okay. Let's go to the back. So why are we fasting? So let's start with a difference of opinion. The Rabbeinu Tam, and this is brought down in other sources, say and then in the Masechet Megillah, he claims that this fast, which we observe on the 13th day of Adar, which is the day directly preceding Purim, commemorates the fast that was conducted on the same day as 13th day of Adar in the time of Esther. So it doesn't say that explicitly in the Megillah. There is no verse that says the Jews fasted on the 13th day of Adar. It doesn't say. But what's the 13th day of Adar? The 13th day of Adar would have been the day of the war. That was the day that Haman had chosen. That's the day in which he called upon the entire population of 127 provinces to engage in a battle of extermination of the Jewish people. And that, according to the Megillah, is in fact what happened. Jews all over the country, once Esther and Mordecai had gained positions of influence and power, sent the, as you know, the second edict of the king, giving the right to the Jewish people to arm themselves and to engage in battle. They needed the permission of the king. They gave it. And on the 13th day of Adar, there were these battles throughout the 122 provinces, which, by the way, the Megillah tells us, resulted in 75,000 Persians dying. So even though there was news about the downfall of Haman and whatever other permission Achashverosh granted the Jews for self-defense, that didn't stop 75,000 people from arming themselves and trying to exterminate their Jewish neighbors. Not a small number. So on the day of battle, apparently, says Rabbi Tam, Jews fasted. We're not sitting down and celebrating. This is our lives are in the balance, and we're fasting. We're fasting and we're davening. Those who are fighting, and those who are not fighting are davening and fasting. And so the fast of the 13th day, Ta'anit Esther, is the fast that happened on the day in which the Jewish population of Persia had to fight for their survival. So as wartime does warrant fasting and prayers, it stands to reason, although not explicitly written in the Megillah, that Jews engaged on that day in fasting and prayer. That's one. Okay. The Rambam, by contrast, has a different opinion. And he says, as recalling the fasts, that the Tanit Esther is not. He's recalling the fasts observed during the days of Haman. What is it talking about? So this is the fast that's mentioned in the fourth parak of Megillah Esther, when finally Mordecai convinces Esther that she needs to go and approach the king, realizing that this could be a life and death, everything hinged on her success. She says, Lech knosset kol hayudim, betsumo lai shloshet yamim laila v'yom, v'niven arotai na'aseh kain. So she tells Mordecai to tell the entire Jewish population that they need to fast for 3 days. For 3 days prior to her going to see Achashverosh, she's going to fast. They should daven for her success. 3 days. Now, what the Chachamim do is taking a look at the dates which are explicitly mentioned in the Megillah. They calculate that things are happening in direct succession. One thing is mentioned, and then following that, the next thing is mentioned. And so these things indicate direct succession, one after the other. So that 3-day fast, when would it have actually happened? And according to some of the Meforshim, suggests that that fast happened when? Happened on the 15th and 16th and 17th day of Nisan, which sounds like what day, what holiday? Purim, exactly. So it sounds like this fast that we fast on the 13th day of Adar is in commemoration of the 3-day fast that took place not on the 13th day of Adar, but it took place in the month of Nisan, the 3-day fast, which is explicitly mentioned in the fourth parak of Megillat Esther. Not everybody accepts the timing of that. So be that as it may, that is one other explanation. Rav Yosef Karo, is a name that you may know, is the author of the Shulchan Aruch. But in addition to the writing the Shulchan Aruch, he also wrote an explanation to the writings of the Rambam called the Magid Mesharim. Now, the Magid Mesharim means the speaker of those things which are just and right. Rabbi Yosef Karo, in addition to being a legalist and a Talmudist, he was also a Kabbalist. And in some of his writings, he tells about having had a heavenly Magi, a heavenly teacher, come, an angelic being, and reveal things to him. And he writes in a book called the Magi Mesharim that when he encountered this heavenly Magi, this Magi told him about this fast, and it was instituted out of the concern for inappropriate conduct that may result from the celebration of Purim. So a solemn day prior to Purim might have been a reminder that have a good time, enjoy yourself, but remember the guidelines. Remember that there are limits to everything. So that's what Yosef Karo's explanation as to why we fast on Tani Esther, sort of like a guardrail in case we forget to restrain ourselves. And the last one I want to share with you is a work called Shut Shevet HaKehati. And the author of this suggests something very interesting. It's a Kabbalistic thought. And he suggests in this book that the Kabbalists maintain that Haman's decree was not entirely annulled. The Jews escaped it only in that generation, but future catastrophes that befall the Jewish people constitute, according to this particular view, a partial fulfillment of Haman's decree of annihilation. And so the Kabbalists point specifically to the Khmelnytsky uprisings, 1648, 1649, as a fulfillment of Haman's edict. What a fascinating idea. And so we observe a day of fasting and prayer to beg for the final elimination of Haman's plot against us. Now, while this is not necessarily in the book, but I think one of the things that does make sense is to say that by extension, then, it means that Amalek was never really fully defeated. That while the story of Haman sounds like it's the last nail in the coffin of Amalek, it's not true. It's not true. And that throughout our history, there are those who rise up against us. B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu lechalotenu. And maybe those forces that rise up are still forces that maybe not genealogically, ethnically are connected to the nation of Amalek, but certainly in a spiritual sense and a philosophic conceptual sense seem to be the inheritors of that ancient hate. And so maybe then Tanit Esther is our fast that says maybe we still ask God for help, that just as we overcame that episode of Amalek's attempt to hurt us, so too may Hashem give us the strength and the ability to overcome other attempts of our enemies, Amalek enemies, to overcome us. Okay, let's continue a little bit more. Okay. Let's just think about a little bit the story. There's a part of the story that we don't always think of, and it's sort of like the backstory. I mentioned to everybody, if you take a look very carefully, read the Megillah, you'll notice that the big party that starts off the Megillah doesn't happen at the beginning of his ascension to the throne. Achashverosh is not throwing this party day one or day two or even year one of his throne. Why is that? So there are many different answers, but I think there's a compelling reason to say the following, and these are enforcing. Achashverosh was not of regal blood, meaning he wasn't a king, he wasn't a prince, his parents were not monarchs. So generally, when you think about the way in which people ascend the throne, it usually is by birth. Somebody's a prince or a princess, and they become the king, the queen. But that wasn't the case with Achashverosh, which also explains one of the reasons that his wife Vashti seemed to spurn him so much. He married her, but she realized that he was more of a commoner than really a royal, and she sort of dismissed him. However, because he was a commoner, because he really was not a direct inheritor of the throne, he needed to convince people and he needed to quell rebellions. And that's why the party never happened at the beginning, because he spent years having to fight and to conquer his opponents in order for him to secure his throne. So finally, he quelled the rebellion. And therefore, when that happened, he made a big party for all of the outlying regions, and then later for Shushan, a party that hopefully would cement his position and guarantee some cooperation. But you know the rest of the story, and now it makes a lot of sense when you figure out Bigtan the Teresh's plot against him. Bigtan and Teresh plotted against him because they were plotting against a king who really had no right to be a king and was really an imposter on the throne. And only because he married a Vashti did he ever ascend to the throne. But now that Vashti was gone, he has no independent right to remain as ruler. So Bigtan V'Teresh are caught conspiring to kill the king. And so this story becomes less like sort of like a fairy tale Disney story, and now has much more palace intrigue with a lot of political overtones that we may not have fully appreciated, and pieces start to fall into place. And it also explains how Esther, with her so cleverness, knew how to manipulate Achashverosh's fear and insecurity. And one of the reasons she did this was because she realized that in order for her to get what she needed to do, which was to save the Jewish people, she needed to pit Achashverosh against Haman. And so how do you successfully pit the king against Haman? You create a situation which inserts doubt in Achashverosh's mind about the loyalty of Haman. So when the queen makes these two parties, do you remember that part of the story? She invites the king and Haman. Now, why would she invite Haman if the queen wants the king's presence? If the queen is inviting the king and including Haman, the king now becomes suspicious and wonders, is there a reason? Is Haman not really as loyal to me as I thought? Is there something going on here? Is there intrigue in the palace? Is Haman and the queen, are they somehow conspiring? He really did care for Esther. That was something God implanted in his heart. But he can't overcome his suspicion as a king who knows that he's got to keep his eyes turned behind his back to see if there's anybody conspiring. So when he has two of these evenings, and Haman is right there first, and he's foremost, and he's right there, and Achashverosh he may often be presented as a foolish fuddy-duddy, a beer belly guy, drinks a lot of beer and wine, and we always think of him as a drunk. He's not entirely stupid. In fact, the Gemara has a machloket, Pikeach hayati peshaya. Is he stupid or is he actually clever? And the very same opening story of Perek Aleph are the same proofs to prove that he's stupid or clever. Those who maintain he's very clever said, unbelievable. He has this huge party for all the outlying provinces. Why is that clever? Because who do you really have to consolidate to make sure that your kingdom is strong? If you're reigning over 127 countries, you have to consolidate the outliers who are not right there with you. You don't see them on a regular basis. But if you somehow manage to garner their support and their allegiance and their loyalty, then at least there's a period of security. It's smart. It was a strategically clever move to make the party for 180 people, 180 days for the provinces which are outliers. On the other side of it, people say that was a stupid thing to do, because what you need to do is first consolidate your home base. There's the people you see on a daily basis. They're the people who you see every day as you walk out of your throne, your palace. That's what you need. You should have done the party for the people in Shushan first, because they're the ones that are going to be the backbone of the whole country. So was he or wasn't he? Was he smart? Was he foolish? It's not clear. But the point of the lack clarity is that nobody dismisses him entirely as being inept. He may appear in the way we've told about it, but he is very manipulatable, but he still has things that have to be answered. He has questions that are proper questions. And so in some ways, of course, that makes him more dangerous, because you have somebody who has some brains, but he can't control himself, or doesn't know what to do with it. In some ways, that's even more dangerous. So why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because I think that creates an understanding of why the story unfolds the way it does. So when Esther realizes what Haman did, when Mordecai tells her, she doesn't go right away and ask her husband to please annul the decree, right? That's not what she does. When she goes in chapter 4 and goes to the king, she says, if the king, Imala Melech Tov, let him come with Haman to a party I'm making. Why? She does that because she wants to sow doubt and she wants to figure it out. And Achashverosh's fear of insurrection explains so much of what happens in the Megillah. The huge celebration described towards the beginning, as I said a minute ago, really is explained through his concern about insurrection and his insecurity about being an illegitimate heir to the throne and not feeling that he has the support of the country, especially after he survived an assassination attempt by Bigtam and Teresh. And Esther was very perceptive about this, and she understood this well and realized that she couldn't persuade the king to spare the Jews when he's feeling so insecure. And so Haman had successfully, apparently, sort of programmed the king's mind, who was somewhat paranoid, very nervous and anxious, to suspect the Jews of insurrection. And so, because that was easy to do, that's always been the case. The Jews are not loyal. Jews are not faithful because they're different. We're different. We have different rules. We have different guidelines. And so difference usually means something's off about us. And therefore, Haman, used that fear to stoke Achashverosh's insecurity. Rav Soloveitchik points out that Achashverosh was reminded of Mordechai's loyalty to him. Remember the night he couldn't sleep, and perhaps became angry at Haman for not rewarding. You remember that whole story? So he couldn't sleep, and he realizes, wait a second, this man saved my life, and we didn't do anything. Well, Haman's like, why did that not happen? And he was wondering, according to the Rav, king was wondering why Haman had not properly rewarded this informer called Mordecai, who saved his life. With Haman suffering humiliation as a result of what the king ordered, and Mordecai having earned the king's favor, Esther then saw an opportunity and seized it. And now she could turn the tables, according to the Rav, and shift the king's suspicion away from her people and onto Haman. So the Rav adds something I just want to mention. The Rav says that in the post-prophetic era, when God speaks to us only indirectly, we must exercise clear, careful, and sound judgment in determining modes of action that will determine the fate of our nation. Our national leaders, says the Rav Soloveitchik, are charged with the responsibility of intuiting prophecy. Wow, what a phrase, intuiting prophecy, if you will, to carefully consider all options and decide how the Almighty wishes them to carry out their mission. Wow, that's it. In some ways, that's an empowering statement. It's also a very scary statement. We're going to trust our leaders that hopefully they will be able to do that. Who are our leaders? Who are the people that you want to say, oh, this person knows how to intuit prophecy? Are these political leaders? Or these are religious leaders? It's very, very hard to know. I'm inclined to say the latter rather than the former. But nonetheless, we live in difficult times. And the story of Purim, of course, is maybe that story of just how difficult times we live. And sometimes the difficult nature of the times we live are overshadowed by the celebratory nature of Purim, the simcha, thank God, the drinking, wonderful, the mishloach manot, the matanot levunim, the costumes. But underneath all of that, Gemara has a very powerful statement. Now, every Yom Tov that we have, every Yom Tov, except for Yom Kippur, well, except for the Yom Kippur, I should say, we say Hallel. We say Hallel on Pesach. We say Hallel on Shavuos. We say Hallel on Sukkot. We say Hallel on Hanukkah, but we don't say Hallel on Purim. And with Hanukkah and Purim seeing so similar in certain ways, Ala Nisim, you know, there's a similar sort of story that became, they tried to eliminate us. We won. We have a celebration. We have a Ness. Either it's a revealed Ness, it's not a revealed Ness, like in Megillat Esther. But why don't we say Purim? Why don't we say Hallel on Purim? So Gemara has a couple of answers. One answer is, well, whenever the Megillah takes the place of Purim, the Megillah takes the place of Hallel. We don't need to say Hallel when we, in fact, are obligated to read the story. The story itself is its own declaration of Hashem's praise. But the Gemara then offers another answer. In some ways, I think, more jarring answer? The answer is this. We're not going to say Hallel. Why not? It was a miracle. Should we declare our gratitude to God for the miracle? The Gemara says, not important. Why? Because the story of Purim is the story of the exposure and vulnerability of the Jewish people to an enemy that came to power in the land that they lived in. That's the story. We were saved. But at the end of the story, after all the celebrations are over, after your Purim service is done, after you get out of your costume, the Jews still remained under the rule of Achashverosh, and they still remained exposed and vulnerable. Nothing changed. It just means they defeated the enemy that arose then. But essentially, we remained in the same position that we started in. We live in another land. We're subject to the whims of a ruler who himself may not be friendly to the Jewish people, may have at one point been prepared to annihilate the Jewish people. He was convinced not to let it happen, but not because he was a big friend of the Jewish people. So why would you want to say Hallel? Big question. So this Purim, we're going to say, we'll read the Megillah, we're going to sing, we're going to make noise when they say the name of the evil Haman. And we're going to dive into Hashem. We're going to say Al Nisim, Val Gvurah, Val Tshuvat, Val Melchamot, Shasita Lavotenu, Vayimim Haim Bezman Hazeh. And we do so. We ask Hashem that as He brought a Yeshua to the Jews in the time of Purim, may He bring a Yeshua to us in our time. Bring home those who need to be brought home. Bring light. The Jews understood things that they didn't understand. The Gemara says something extraordinary. I'm going to end with this. Extraordinary. I think I said it, but it bears repetition because its message, I think, is just so riveting. At the time of Matan Torah, where the Jews said Nasiv and Ishma, an amazing thing happened. God revealed Himself, gave us the Aseret that He brought, and later the Shnei Luchot Habri. An amazing moment. But, says the Gemara, why is that so amazing? In fact, what choice did the Jews have? They're standing at Mount Sinai. God in some ways coerced them. How could you possibly say no to the thunder, the lightning, all this stuff going on? They're scared out of their minds. They don't know whether they're going to live or going to die. And you're going to take a look at this moment of Har Sinai and say, wow, that's such an amazing moment of dedication and commitment to Torah. Not really. It feels more like coercion than anything else. So how could God ever possibly hold the Jews responsible for not living up to a standard that He wanted them to live up to that's mentioned in the Torah? If the giving of the Torah happened under coercive circumstances, it's not fair. You can't hold them responsible. It's just not right. Powerful argument, the Gemara says. The Gemara says, you're absolutely right. You're right. That Har Sinai was a flawed experience. I can't believe I'm saying that. But I'm not saying so. I wouldn't have the guts to say this. Who am I to say that? The Gemara says it in Masechet Shabbos. Well, if that was a flawed experience, if giving the Torah at Har Sinai was a flawed experience, it wasn't full, it wasn't a complete embrace of Torah, does that mean that the Jewish people never embraced Torah? That we have this sort of diminished story? So the Gemara says, no. It all was made right and good centuries later with the story of Purim. The story of Purim? Yes, the Gemara says. At the conclusion of the story of Purim, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, says Mordechai and Esther when they wrote the Megillah. What does that mean? That at the conclusion of the Purim story, the Jewish people that lived in Persia, which is the entirety of the Jewish nation, openly embraced Torah and all of their obligations in a manner that didn't exist at the time of Har Sinai. In other words, Purim is the second holiday in which we celebrate our acceptance of the Torah. And we do it in a manner, we accept it there in a wholehearted manner that we never accepted at Har Sinai, centuries before it. So Yehirat Sod, may Hashem bless all of us, wherever we are, however we celebrate, with accepting our role as God's children, understanding Hashem's love, returning that love, returning our obligations to each other, fulfilling what we need to do to stand shoulder to shoulder with Jews in our neighborhood, in our shul, in our people, no matter where we are. And may this be the last Purim that we have to celebrate with question marks circling in our minds. What's going to be? What's going to be? Next year, Yerushalayim, next year with the entire Jewish people standing in the courtyard of rebuilt Beit HaMikdash, where our future is secure and bright and living under the protection of Hashem. Thanks everybody for listening. I want to wish everybody, those who are fasting, it should be a meaningful fast. May have a Freilich and Purim on Shabbos, on Friday, leading into Shabbos. Again, the Seuda generally should be in the morning, should be mostly completed by 1:27. So you have till then to have most of your Suda. It doesn't have to be first thing in the morning. You can start your Suda at 12, 12:30, fulfilling the obligation of your Purim Suda on Friday, and then have your regular Shabbos meal later in the day. Feel free to unmute yourselves and let's share some thoughts if you're up for that. You guys have been really quiet last few weeks. Like, I don't know what's going on there. But if you're feeling up to it, I'd be more than happy to hear some of your thoughts and comments.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
I just had a memory as you were talking. Kippur, 1973. I wasn't coming to Shemaim regularly yet, but I remember, no, not Yom Kippur, Simchas Torah, 73.
Yep.
I went to Shemaim. As I think I still wasn't coming regularly hours later. And I remember Rabbi Fushanda, all of a sudden, getting up and fighting the crowd and saying, not this year. This year we have to be more quiet than usual. And as they were talking, that memory just came to my mind.
I understand. You know, it happened again October the 7th was Simchas Torah. And as the news spread throughout the Jewish communities throughout the world, the same question arose. What should we be doing? And here
But I remember it. I remember 2023, but I also remember 73. You were probably there on that day too, but
I think I remember being at Shiur Tefillah, Marty. I remember being at Shiur Tefillah for Hakafos. For whatever reason, Shiur Tefillah at that time was one of the places for the younger Hebrew to be at. And I remember that same sort of discussion breaking out there. And it broke out for us on October 7th everywhere.
yeah.
And October 7th, it was a more muted Simcha, but I remember my feeling that, you know, you can't take everything away from us. You can't come and take away our opportunity to celebrate that which defines who we are as Jews. That's too much. And so, yes, we did have a couples, and it was
Yeah.
and now it's you know, here we are at Purim at 2025, 5785, and we still have hostages in the tunnels. And we have some who have been released, and the same question: should we be celebrating? Like, it's hard for me to say no. We shouldn't be celebrating.
I wasn't trying to make an editorial comment. I was just
Sharing a memory.
yeah.
I understand. I get it, and I'm thinking about what you're saying. But this is who we are. We are an extraordinary strong people, and even when some of our brothers and sisters are in positions of great danger, we daven for them, and we ask Hashem to intercede, and we show Him that we're still on His side. We're still on His team, and we do that by observing what we need to observe. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. I want to remind you to please join next Tuesday. And again, remember, please, April the 1st is about Haggadah ideas and messages. It may be on a new Zoom link, which I'll try to show everybody. And April 1st will be the last class before Pesach. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week, a week of bracha, a week of shalom, a week of simcha, and a week of good news for the entire Jewish people. Bye.
Diamond.
Man.
So I just
Um,
may I ask you, just a brief practical question regarding Purim.
Yeah.
Sorry, what can you remind me? What is the maybe I didn't hear? What is the earliest halachic point in the day at which one can start the Purim Suda?
Well, you have to daven Shacharis and hear the Megillah first,
Sure.
and then you should be I mean, if you can, do the mitzvahs of Matanat Levi and Mishloach Manot, and then start it then. So technically, shortly after davening, so whenever that is, you have to have Megillah first. You should hear Megillah before the Suda if you can.
You know what? Can I be in touch with you about by WhatsApp about that question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be in touch with you. Be
Good
well.
night,
Thanks so much.
everybody. All
Take
the
care.
best.
Thanks so
Good
much.
night.